Welcome back to our third tutorial video for the Natural Capital Plant Database. This is Dan Halsey. In this video we are going to focus on searching for plants by characteristics. This page is found under the Plant Database tab and then by clicking on Search for Plants. This is available at the designer and individual level of subscription on the Plant Database. Searching for plants is done by first assessing and doing a site assessment of your homestead or your landscape for the types of conditions that exist environmentally and climatically, so that you can select plants that are suitable for occupying those spaces. In the Plant Database search page, you can search for plants by family name. If you know of plants by their family name and scientific name, you can search for them on here by family name, and all of the plants that are related to that plant can then be found. You can also search by plant type. Now this is done pretty much on every plant search, so that you don't have this huge list of plants and have to swarm through all of them, but to have really a very truncated list of plants that are specific to that specific search for a specific use. In this case, we might pull down to, say, deciduous tree. At other times, we might be looking for annuals for an annual garden, or something that we can use in the home, or potted plants, but most of the annual plants are for gardening vegetables. We also have aquatic plants, biennial plants, and as you can see, all the plant types that are generally identified in the landscape. So on this time, we'll just click on deciduous tree. Then, what zone are you planting in? Plants will have a number of zones that they can tolerate, and perhaps they have one specific zone where they will thrive. But if a plant can tolerate or will thrive a range of zones, putting a number in here will select all the plants that have that zone within their range. So we will say here zone 3, because I am in zone 3B, and also zone 4 at times, as we have a little bit of climate change here. So, but zone 3 will make sure that the plants that I have on this list are hardy to zone 3, and temperatures in the wintertime, they're down to the minus 35 degrees, minus 30 degrees. The pH is also important to have for your soils. And plants do have a specific range for pH, so you would put that in here. 7 is neutral, and we'll look for the neutral plants that are in zone 3, that are deciduous trees. Then if I have a specific space, now this is more on the conventional landscaping, but when we're building polycultures and we've already built the structure of the plants and the layers of our forest, from the canopy to the shade trees, to the fruiting shrubs and the perennials and the grasses and ground covers and such, I may be looking for a plant, maybe even a deciduous tree that is fairly small. Say I'm looking for a small apple tree type size, which is only about 12 feet wide, or any tree that will go to 12 to 14 feet wide, and that all fits in that space. I can put that number in here, and those trees that are that size at maturity will show up in the list. Now I'm going to leave these two blank because I want to see what selection I have for height and spread on those plants. Now, ecological functions, which many times we relegate to the shrubs and to perennials, are also available here, and you can see all the ecological functions available to us in nature to help us build functioning polycultures where the ecological services are shared among the plants. Now, in many cases, we might want to put an understory of nitrogen fixers or nitrogen scavengers. And as you roll over it, you'll see there will be a little explanation of what that plant does. Dynamic accumulators down to soil builders and soil cultivators. Also, wildlife services, restorers, air cleaners, reclamation plants, toxin absorbing type plants, repellents, aromatic pest confusers, which are very helpful in our landscapes. Fungicide, which is some plants produce their own fungicide for their health and their immune system, but also that fungicide is shared between plants in close proximity. So all of these ecological functions are shared among the plants that are grown close to each other. So a few of these you can pick on and find, and if you're doing perennials or you're doing shrubs, those plants have a lot of these services. Human uses now. Look at all the human uses that are available, from wood all the way to the biomass, coppicing, cut flowers, essential oils, fibers, medicine, and pollarding, which is a different way of harvesting wood, insect repellents, certain plants that repel insects, and those essential oils of those plants can be used by humans to repel insects from us also. So a combination of ecological functions and human uses can be used to find plants that have both. And many times in our landscapes we want things that have multiple functions. That's a principle of permaculture, is building our systems with multiple functions, and then we need fewer components. Sun requirements: if we are in full sun and there isn't a lot of shade, we would click on full sun. If we're looking for a plant that would be in partial shade underneath the canopy, we might click that. If we're clicking for other plants, say understory plants that are in full shade, then of course you would click on full shade. In this case, let's just say we have full sun. We're looking for this. And remember, we are clicking on deciduous trees, zone 3, with a pH of 7. We're in full sun, and then we'll just look at our human use as food, which is a common parameter for many of our searches. And then the soil type. On the bottom here are the conditions of the site that we are planting in. Right? So we are going to have full sun, partial shade, or shade. We are going to have a certain soil type that we're planting in, either it's wet or moderate. And you can click a number of these if you want all the plants that are in full sun or partial shade. You will get those too. But keep in mind that as you click on these parameters, the plants must fulfill everything that you click. So if you click both full sun and partial shade, the plant must be capable of living in full sun and partial shade, as opposed to these, which are required plants that can adapt to full sun. Part of them will be adaptable in partial shade, others require full sun only. So it keeps our list big. And so in this case, I'll just click on, say, clay soils for this as our site-specific conditions. If we have a drought issue or a flood issue, if it's a low-lying area, you might want to click on that and also reduce the list to only plants that can tolerate floods. If you're working in the boulevard or another area on the property that has a salt issue next to the driveway in the northern climates, along a boulevard on city streets, or even on a freeway where the snowplows will be projecting the snow way onto your property, you might want to make sure that you click on that so that the plants you get are salt tolerant. If you have a deer issue, rabbit issue, gopher issue, also especially with the smaller plants and perennials, you want to click on plants that are resistant to these animals. And then finally, root types. When we are partitioning the soil, when we are trying to put in plants with diverse types of roots, some are bulbs, some are fibrous shallow or fibrous deep, and then we plant within those tap roots that don't interfere with those fibrous roots. This is how we partition the soil, is by selecting plants that have a certain type of root structure. And then growth rate, fast, slow, or moderate. Again, another choice to have in these. So this is worth playing with a few times, making your choices, seeing what kind of plants you get in your list, and playing with it so that you can efficiently search for plants. I highly suggest only clicking the parameters that are required of your space. If you start just clicking a lot of different boxes here, your plant list will be reduced considerably, because everything that you select as a parameter must be achieved by the plant before it will be listed. So in this case, we have a deciduous tree in zone 3 with a pH of 7. We haven't clicked any ecological functions for that. We're just saying that that's not a requirement. That's not saying that it will not select plants with these functions. We're just saying it does not have to have these functions. It is, however, required to be a food source. So we're looking for deciduous trees with a fruit or a food that comes from the tree. And that could be bark, or that could also be leaves and stems in many plants. It must be able to take full sun or require full sun and live in clay soil. So all of these are selected. We go down to submit query, and abracadabra, here we have the trees. in zone 7 that have edible food and in clay soils. Now, a different soil would make a different list, but these plants are specifically full sun plants in clay soil, in a pH of 7 and in zone 3. If it was in zone 4, of course, the plant list would probably be longer, but these are zone 3 tolerant plants. And you'll also see that there are polycultures that have already been devised for apple, for box elder, for black cherry, and for choke cherry. And there's some natural plant associates, some naturally occurring plants in nature that go along with a few of these plants as they grow wild. There's also 4 polycultures that have the American plum. This is the list you have. This is what you've got. Now, if you want to make your list longer, you can go back and take out some things or change the pH or change the soil type or whatever it is flexible on your site. Get that list bigger. Or you might even just take out that food parameter, and then this list would get much longer, and you'd be able to find that information later in your Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so at this point you've done your search, you have your plant list, and you've decided that this is an adequate list for you to work with. Now in this case you might want to go and change and play with the search a little bit and get a little bit longer list. But the reason we want a pretty decent list because we can do some selection later. Right here is the export button. This exports this list and the associated information into an Excel spreadsheet. On a Macintosh and most PCs, when you click on this, it will download that spreadsheet and automatically open Excel. If not, you can open it from within Excel, this list, when it's downloaded, and then all of these plants will show up. So I'm going to click on export. It says I can save the file also, but I'm opening it up right into Excel. Excel opens up. And there we go. And now we have the Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to close some of these toolbars here. Right? And if you're familiar with Excel, you see that at the top we have the column names, right, at the top. And so I usually select that row and make that boldface. And I'm starting my formatting here. I like to get the numbers as I collect these rows here. I like to get the numbers centered so it's easier to see those. And then of course, and then I might lower the second row to kind of separate the titles a little bit. And then start widening the columns so I can see what the common names are. Maybe not so much the scientific names, but sometimes you want to see that. If they're all deciduous, you can even squish that down. If you didn't specify which type of plant you want, you would get all the plants. Like in this case, if you didn't say deciduous tree, you would get all the plant types that are food in clay in zone 3 with a pH of 7, which would be quite long. Then we have the height of the tree in feet and the spread of the tree in feet, and then the root depth. Here is seasonal interest, more seasonal interest details, the color of the flower, and I'll scroll across here, the root type, bloom time, harvest time, the texture of the plant and the form of the plant, and these are terms used in landscape design. Texture has to do with the fineness of, like say, grass, which is really fine, or basswood leaves, which are really big and very coarse. So it's how it looks from a distance. And then the shape of the tree, rounded, pyramidal, weeping, irregular. Sometimes they're columnar, sometimes there's globes. So you can just imagine the shape of the plant. Their growth rate, insect predation, and that is if the plant is susceptible to insects. Disease, problems, major, minor, and it doesn't give you a lot of information of what that is, but at that point it's basically just alerting you to the fact that you might want to consider that there's some disease issues with these plants. In this case, this has a major one, and this one too. What type of light it needs, and you can see now as we go across here, even though we clicked on full sun, but a lot of them live in shade and partial shade. So that's good to know. This is what we're learning, how we learn about the plants. The hardiness of the plant, zone 3 to zone 8. Now you can see that these will go down to zone 3, but they also go up to zone 8. Soil tolerance, and this is the watering regime as far as wet or moderate soil. Now look, a lot of these can tolerate wet soils or dry soils or moderate soils. So it's the tolerances that they have for soil that is shown here. Ecological services now we're getting into the list of all the ecological functions and services and roles that the plants may play in the landscape. And then finally, the human uses. This is the Excel spreadsheet that is downloaded. Notice that the name of it has nothing to do with your search or what you're doing, so you will want to do a save as and save this file right away into a folder for your design work. I would highly suggest naming the file based on your search parameters, because nowhere in this file are the search parameters that you used. So you might call this Sun Z3 pH 7 clay and food deciduous tree, however you want to use it, but use that. Or you can also take a frame down in the bottom here or up on top somewhere and put in your search parameters so that you can remember what this list was for. One thing in my last note is, what does not show up on this list is the soil type. So if you clicked on clay or you clicked on any other types, the soil type does not show on these lists. And there's a good reason for that, but I will not go into that. But soil types do not show up on this list, so make sure that you make a note on here that this search was for clay or whatever you searched for at that time. This is how we start doing our design work and building our polycultures and filling the structure of our landscape with plants, is by doing our searches through the plant database. That's the Excel spreadsheet. We can always go back to the site and do another search. You can also, once you have done this and you want to find out some more information, just like in the plant list, you can go back and look at details about these plants and more information. Here's the human uses, ecological functions, compatibilities, and at the bottom, if there were any concerns about the plant, that would show up there. So this is a very standardized format for information. It's very predictable. The point of this database is to be able to go on quickly, do your searches, download your plant lists, and get off and go work in Excel and start developing your lists so that you can also put those in to your design. This is to help you build a very usable and ecologically functional plant list to devise ecologically balanced and functional landscapes. Thank you for taking this third tour with me, Dan Halsey, and I and Paula Westmoreland, partners in Natural Capital. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to showing you continued videos as we do our tutorials. The next tutorial that we will be doing will be number 4, and that will be for working in Excel to develop your plant list and use it efficiently to transfer it onto your design. Thank you.